Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for July 19th work session. Up first, we have a preliminary agenda review. If you guys have any questions, stop me. On the 26th, we'll have our regular session at 7 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order, have the invocation and pledge to the flag, and follow the rules and procedures effective December 15th, 2020. Our meeting schedule for August will be Tuesday, August 2nd, 9th, and 16th. We'll have work sessions at 4 p.m. 23rd, a regular session at 7 p.m. And on the 30th, we have no meeting scheduled. Appointments to the Historic District Commission and Hagerstown Loan Review Authority. We will have citizen comments that you can do in person or by sending an email to councilcomments@hagerstownmd.org no later than 5 p.m. on Tuesday, July 26th. We'll approve the minutes. Under consent agenda for community engagement, we have a street closure and open container exemption for Wind Down August 19th. Engineering 2022 pavement preservation program for $1,245,000. Pavement marking for $95,000. Handicap ramps not to exceed $120,000. Curb and sidewalk replacement program for $225,000. Improvements to West Hillcrest Road for $235,232.68. The purchase of a 2022 Ranger Super Cab for $29,765. For HR, we have fiscal year 23 liability and property funds insurance through Legit for $533,131. IT telephone system annual support and maintenance for $26,755. Police, we have an emergency purchase for Sallyport handrail replacement for $13,817.25. For Public Works, we have a street closure approval for the Donut Alley 5K Run, August 12th, and open container exemption for Freedom Fest, July 30th, 2022. Under Utilities, light LED street lights for $29,712. LED street lights inventory for $83,791.50. The vehicle replacement for $279,505. Water double check detector assemblies for $65,356. Water aggregate Martin Marietta for $26,180. Water change order to filter media replacement for $241,254. Wastewater local limit study for $83,680. Wastewater plant nutrient load re-rating for $218,500. Wastewater treatment plant replacement of waste activated scum pumps for $89,828. Fiscal year 22 pelletizer operating and pass-through expense increase for May through June, $169,788. Wastewater fiscal year 23 pelletizer operating costs, $1,639,093. Wastewater pelletizer pass-through expenses for $100,000, and wastewater collections Muffin Monster cartridge for pump station 18, $13,417. Under unfinished business, we have approval of an ordinance conversion district overlay for 535 Summit Ave, approval of an ordinance local conversion district overlay 245 North Potomac Street, approval of an ordinance illicit discharge ordinance, approval of annexation resolutions for Unger Properties LLC. Under new business, introduction of an ordinance amending city code, chapter 238 water and 240 wastewater, approval of a resolution subrecipient agreement with CVB and approval of ARPA funding, approval of a resolution amendment to deed of perpetual easement and right-of-way between the City of Hagerstown and Hagerstown Industrial Properties, 55 West Oak Ridge Drive, approval of a memorandum of agreement with the Maryland Historical Trust for Wheaton Park improvements, approval to apply for law enforcement training scholarship grants, approval of a new position, the Hagerstown Police Department Community Liaison Coordinator, approval of the Maryland State Arts Council PAM Planning Grant Agreement, approval of funding source, police and fire retirement experience study, approval of changes to incentive program guidelines and application forms, approval of adding 239 North Locust Street to the competitive negotiated sale process, and approval of event sponsorship policy. We'll have city administrator comments, mayor council comments, and we'll adjourn. Do you guys have any questions? Perfect. Up next, we have event sponsorship follow-up with Brittany.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Afternoon.
So per our conversation last week, I looked at the process and I have a proposal here, which is made to make this process equitable. So what I'm proposing is the City of Hagerstown will provide event sponsorships not to exceed 50% of the projected event budget or not to exceed $5,000. If the city receives a sponsorship request for more than $5,000, it will be brought before mayor and council for approval. Any approved amount exceeding $5,000 will be reimbursed to the organization upon final approval of receipts. And then we had discussed setting aside a certain amount of money for new events. So the city will set aside $10,000 from the event sponsorship budget for new events. For first-year applicants, the amount for an event sponsorship will not exceed $2,500. And if you flip it over on the back or your next page, the spreadsheet there, really there would only be two proposals that we had that came in that would be falling under the amount. So Watches and Whiskey, they would be a first-year event sponsor. They requested $5,000. If we followed this new proposal, they would only receive $2,500 this year, but then for next year they could ask for $5,000. And then the Mummers Parade asked for $10,000, but per comments at last meeting, we think that that's closer to $2,000 than what they're requesting.
Yeah, I'm good with this.
And after I went back to my office after the last meeting and did a quick run through, and you can see almost all of the events are requesting 50% or less. So I feel like that's fair. It's it made it pretty easy, actually, to do that.
Yeah,
Thank you for putting this together.
Yeah,
thank
thank
you.
you. Sounds good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Nothing like a process, right?
All right, Hagerstown Fieldhouse Phase 2 update, economic impact and budget. Welcome, Rodney and John.
How's everybody today?
Doing well, how are you?
Excellent, thank you.
Well done.
So we come back, coming to the near to the end of the Phase 2 contract that we signed with you guys, wherein we were going to develop 35% plans for construction of the facility, to revise the business plan, come up with legal agreements for the development and for the operation of the facility, and come up with an economic impact report. Today, I'd like to review the economic impact report, which is still in draft format. We've got a couple small changes that we need to make, but should be done by the end of this week. I should be back to you at the beginning of next week with draft legal agreements for operation and construction and the budget. We did a first round, the plans are complete. Did a first round of budgeting that has led to some discussion on some value engineering to try to bring it into the number that we originally put forth 7 months ago. So what I'd like to do now is run through the economic impact report. And really, I'm going to cover 4 areas. The impact that the project is going to have during the construction period, the impact that visitors that the facility is going to create will have on the community, the overall 20-year economic impact, and then the revenue, projected revenues to the city, to the county, and to the state. Up, maybe. Doop, doop. Any thoughts?
I think this is where we go, Eric, help. Okay.
There we go. All right, so for purposes of the study, they assumed that construction was 22 million. The budget we originally given you was 22.6. We're still working on that based on the numbers that we're getting in on the, from the 35% plans. Half of that would be on material, they assume, and the other half on labor. The project is going to create 164 jobs directly and induce another 60 jobs. It's going to, the wages that will be paid out, which is about half, 11 million, will create about 400,000 in local spending. Overall, the construction project is going to have a $33 million direct and induced impact on the community. The tournament and visitor impact. As you know, the basketball court side of this building is going to be used for about half the weekends of the year for tournaments and events. 26 events annually, about 768 teams we're projecting would come, and this is at steady state, which is going to generate annually 27,000 visitors to the community, which in turn interprets to about 9,200 room nights. So it's a pretty good effect on the local hotel industry. About 1.382 million in hotel spending annually, and the visitors will be spending about 2.3 million annually in town. In the area, I should say, so I gotta reduce it and then do that, there we go. So overall, over the 20 years, the impact of this facility, direct and indirect jobs, 50, salaries and wages paid, direct and indirect, about 30.5 million, taxable sales and purchases, almost $90 million. So it has a fairly dramatic impact on the town. Hagerstown revenue is broken up into a few different categories. We have the amusement taxes for the events that will be held. Admission will be charged. You guys have 10% tax on athletic events that falls under your amusement tax. That equates to about $2.4 million over the 20 years. Real estate taxes or payment in lieu of taxes, depending on how the state figures out whether and how much this should be taxed. We have calculated at 2.5 million. I actually think that that number is going to be about twice that, because in the study, after we combed through it a little bit more earlier today, we saw that they only valued the building at half of the project cost, and we think that the building would be valued at the project cost. Miscellaneous taxes and fees, about $128,000 over the 20 years. The rent, we've got at 9.9 million. That's the revenue share that we had proposed to you through the business plan and in other documents, where at the end of the day, there's a split in revenue between the city and the operating tenant. So the total to Hagerstown over the 20 years is about 15 million. Any questions on that one? I figure that's probably one of the most important ones.
That's great.
So Washington County and Maryland also receive revenue out of this. Local income taxes for Washington County, about $1 million. Hotel taxes, about $2.2 million, and another $156,000 in miscellaneous taxes and fees. State of Maryland, that's over 20 years, all of these numbers on this slide. State of Maryland is going to get about $5.3 million in sales tax and income taxes to the state through all those wages being paid, come up to about $1.5 million. So in particular, that number back on the Hagerstown page, we've got to adjust that because I think the folks who did the study misvalued the real estate. And in conversations with Ms. Hepburn and with Mr. Tissue, I think we all agreed that the operator, if they're not specifically charged a tax that's payable to the city of Hagerstown, that the operator would agree to a payment in lieu of taxes equivalent to your real estate tax rate. So roughly $220,000, $230,000 a year over the 20 years. So that number would be something more like 4.6 million rather than the 2.5 that is currently in the study that we're going to fix.
So, just to be clear for these numbers, in your comfortability in presenting them, you don't envision asking for a waiver of the amusement tax, and you're fine with paying an agreeable pilot?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And a revenue split. I think we realize that the project won't happen
I
absent these.
just want to make sure a project of this magnitude, you were comfortable doing that.
Yeah, yep. We are. So, as some of the funding has come together, Mr. Tissue and Ms. Hepburn have been letting me know some of the requirements that have come. We had proposed a schedule originally that had the facility opening up in the beginning of Q4 2023. Some of the funding that came through the last legislative session has some requirements on how the project is procured and how the potential contractor would be qualified through the state system. That adds anywhere from 4 to 5 months to the project. So given the fact that we were all hustling really hard to try to make Q4 2023 happen, I think some of those requirements, it's going to make more of a Q3 2024 the objective at this point. If some magic source of funds that has no conditions attached to it comes forward, I suppose it's still possible that 2023 could be met, but based on the information we have, I think the next time we come to you with all of the Phase 2 documents complete and a final presentation, the schedule I think that we would give you then is in all probability going to say Q3 2024.
So it's just those conditions associated with just that portion of funds that are being contributed to the project, the total of 2.5 million? Not a portion of it, but a total of that amount? Because I know there was like two different things.
We're
You know
not
what I
getting
mean?
the other 500,000.
What's that?
We're not getting the other 500,000.
But if we didn't have to depend on that 2.5 within this equation, we wouldn't have to push it out that far, or you think realistically you'd still be somewhere in the spring of 24?
We're pretty close right now. So in order to make Q4 '23, we'd really need to break ground by October and November of this
Right.
year, judiciously.
Which we were shooting
October.
for.
Right, and that's what we're shooting for. From a plan and permit perspective,
Mhm.
we're there, although we're close to not being there, but we're there, right? The plans are,
Can get there.
we can get there. The plans are months, 60 days away or so from being permittable.
I think so.
And so one could make the argument that if all the funding fell into place and that we were to, at the next time we came around, you release me to continue all the way to permits on the plans, because right now we're just going up to bid documents,
Mhm.
that potentially we could get there. But based on everything else we've heard about some of the other requirements tied up with this funding, and also I think some requirements that maybe we hadn't fully considered about your procurement rules vis-à-vis me, they're a little bit more complex than we thought. And really adding, 60 or so days to it, and we don't really have a 60-day margin as it stands now. It's gonna be my advice the next time we meet, that you continue as if we're trying to make that, because I think the way things are gonna pan out, we'll be hustling to get
Okay.
that on 24.
It
So
gives
if I won the lottery today and had $2.5 million to give and just said, okay, we don't need the state money anymore, here's $2.5 million that I just won, that would take away all of those state requirements and everything. I get our own procurement process, but would it,
Yeah, I mean, it kicks in.
Eliminate the
Davis
hassle.
Bacon wages, which increase the price, different other requirements that the state and federal funding sources have that we don't necessarily have in our
So
procurement
when you
policy.
say state and federal, you're saying that you'd have to do it for both of those other funding components?
Yeah, if
In other
we-
words, it isn't one, it's both that matter
Yes.
in regard to that.
Yeah, if some of these other potential things that we've applied for come to fruition, some of these are federal grants.
I got it.
They'll have all the same strings attached to them.
Okay,
And so even if we splice and try to do this project and say it's different parts or it's two
Yeah.
different projects, they said, no, it's one. But realistically, the reality with the state money is we have to go back through the Board of Public Works for two separate approvals. One, to actually get the money, but two, after we bid for 30 days under their suggested things we have to have in place. Then we have to go back to the Board of Public Works and get their approval for who we select as our vendor before we actually start working, or we jeopardize potentially not getting reimbursed.
do you know if there's ever been an exception to that? Like if it was not that this is an emergency, but if it, hey, we need to get this ball rolling and here's why from a fiscal standpoint?
I can ask those questions, but I don't think that there's any way around the Board of Public Works.
Yeah, I've never heard of one.
And we'll be back, separate from the presentation on the field house. Myself, Brooke, or Stacy, or a combination of the three of us will be back in August, just to kind of touch base overall with the state money and what we have to do, because we actually have it for two projects, one for the field house and one for the burn building, just so that everybody's aware of the steps and the things we have to do and to actually get agreement to accept the money.
Thank you.
So the goal tonight was really just to update you and let you know that we're still working at this and very, very diligently. Our goal now would be to come back, well, we're gonna finish the impact statement. Next week, I hope to apply for county hotel tax revenue as per the memo. We're gonna submit that next week. In August, probably the 16th, we'll be back to review in more detail the impact statement, but also the agreements. It's important that we have an agreement with ESM, not only for the construction, but obviously the operation. And those will be very detailed, a lot of information there to digest. We'll review those with you in August. In addition to that, then if we're ready, to move forward, to finish the drawings and get everything to a point where we can be ready for construction, we'd have to authorize that contract as well. And then after that, it would be finishing up the drawings, maybe be bid ready by the end of this calendar year for sure. And then in the spring, we could go after more state money if we continue to keep that on the plate, and hopefully have a contract awarded early next year, maybe like April-ish kind of timeframe. That's kind of where it's laying out right now.
Okay.
Awesome.
It's exciting.
Yeah, really is. Super excited. Yeah.
Do you guys have any questions?
Can we get a copy of these numbers?
Yes, I'm going to make the few tweaks that we just talked about. I expect to have that back to Ronnie by tomorrow.
So I'll send, Scott will send it out to everyone, and then it's gonna kind of go public when we take it over to the county and ask for tell them to take this next week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
All right, Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area request. We have Elizabeth Shadow, the Executive Director.
And I brought some things that you all could just simply enjoy as
Thank you.
reading later on if you would like to take one as a.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor Keller, council members. I'm Elizabeth Chateau, the Executive Director of the Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area. I do want to mention that I'm joined by some of our leadership, Al Martin from our Board of Directors. Steve Buckmiller is behind me from our Advisory Council. Dan Speddens over there, also from our Advisory Council. And Dan additionally represents the Tourism Development Board on the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. So I want to thank you all for this opportunity. I'm here to request that you consider a fiscal year 23 appropriation to our nonprofit in the same amount that you provided last year, which was $7,200. Other than a small grant from Hagerstown in fiscal year 14, last year's contribution is the only financial support our program has received from the city in our 16-year history. And we hope that you agree that the benefit we bring to Hagerstown is worth a significant contribution in fiscal year 23 and thereafter. While eligibility to apply for grants is just one of the benefits we bring to Hagerstown, the payoff is substantial. To be eligible to apply for grants through the Maryland Heritage Areas program, projects proposed by local governments and nonprofits must be located within the boundary of a certified heritage area. For Hagerstown, that's the Heart of the Civil War. And to help our partners succeed, our team offers substantial coaching and assistance to local organizations as grant applications are prepared. To date, over $1.1 million in direct grant support has been awarded to government and nonprofit applicants or projects in the city of Hagerstown from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. And further, each grant dollar must be matched dollar for dollar with non-state investment, which means more investment for Hagerstown, often from businesses, foundations, and even the federal government. And the value of volunteer time and sweat equity counts too. Ultimately, the impact is huge. According to a study by the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority using 2019 data, our heritage areas' annual impact is $450.2 million in economic contribution, plus 6,376 jobs supported and sustained, and over $60 million in state and local taxes generated. And that's pre-pandemic data, which provides a sound baseline as we emerge from the challenges of COVID-19. If you aren't familiar with the projects we've helped to make possible, I thought I'd name just a few, starting with fiscal year 07 and continuing with fiscal year 23. And I'm going to share a range of things that have received small mini grants up to large $100,000 capital grants, which is the highest grant our program awards. So we've had more than one grant for city streetscape improvements here in Hagerstown, including the development of the sidewalk Cafe District on Potomac Street, a collections and museum feasibility assessment for the Dolman Black Heritage Museum, interpretive waysides in downtown Hagerstown, the Valley of the Shadow Civil War exhibit at the Fine Arts Museum for the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, walking tour brochure for Hagerstown/Rose Hill Cemetery, 2 grants supporting different aspects of the Downtown Cultural Arts Trail, Hagerstown in World War I brochure, a vertical platform lift for the Washington County Historical Society, Joshua Johnson exhibit at the Fine Arts Museum. We helped with the Maryland Theater expansion, the World Canals Conference, Hager's House Visitor Center planning, and just announced last week $65,000 to support the Clara Barton Memorial Project in Hagerstown. Now, other benefits to the city include a wide range of technical assistance. In collaboration with the Visit Hagerstown, we undertake destination marketing. We host an online education portal with lesson plans and student group travel guidance. And finally, we operate a visitor center at the historic Newcomer House. That's near Keedysville. But there we refer many visitors to Hagerstown for dining and lodging and additional things to see and do while visiting the area or for planning a return trip. Like all 501c3 nonprofit organizations, the Heart of the Civil War needs diverse sources of support to sustain and continue operating. A contribution of $7,200 equates to maybe 3% of our operating budget. Sustaining operations is essential to our ability to generate these things that have a return on investment. This moment in time speaks to history relevance like no other period that I can recall. The Heritage Area just embarked on a new strategic plan acknowledging just that. It sets forth an ambitious vision that our work will bring about a vast and diverse audience that engages meaningfully with the past and the present in the Heritage Area, carrying their experiences here into the future. And the city of Hagerstown is a place that speaks powerfully to the presence of the past. You can help us realize that vision to the benefit of your citizens. So I hope for your favorable consideration, and thank you.
Thank you. Do you guys have any questions for Elizabeth? All right, no question. Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate your time and all that you do.
Thank you.
All right, up next, ARPA policies and procedures. Michelle Brook.
Good afternoon. We will try to keep it short, we promise.
So Michelle and I are here tonight to present to you a proposed ARPA policies and procedures guide. Stacy Pierre-Lewis, our grant coordinator, compiled this. She did a great job. And the three of us have attended multiple ARPA webinars, talked with our auditors a little bit. And while it's not required, it's highly encouraged that we have something like this in place. So this covers eligible uses, compliance with federal procurement requirements, reporting, subrecipient compliance, and contract provisions. It's not meant to replace our current grant or purchasing policy, just kind of provide a little bit more direct direction on how to spend this $20.4 million in federal funding we have.
Correct. So again, while this document is not necessarily mandatory per the IRS, everybody is strongly and highly recommending. Of course, two of the big things we've already got in place, and they wanted it in written fashion, and that was one, a grant policy, which we have in place, and two, a procurement or a purchasing policy, which we do have in place, and there's a competitive process within our procurement policy. So this document is just kind of to augment. The other thing with this document that we really tried to take a step back, there are so many specific things outlined in federal regulations. So instead of attempting to place them all here, we put numbers and codes where they could be found. And when we place this on the website, we are going to have links, so it takes you there. So that when they update these, and they do, they update them sometimes annually, sometimes faster right now because of ARPA. So as they update them, we're not gonna have to constantly come back and get with the group here in this body to go ahead and approve. The reason that we're going to cover and review it real quick, but the other thing is we do want to come back at the end of the month and add it for approval, or even next month for approval, because the grant policy and our purchasing policy are both written policies that are approved by this body. And again, since this is so highly recommended and all eyes are on all the federal spending to make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, we just want to make sure we cover that. So as Burke mentioned, if you turn a page, you'll see a short introduction. And again, it's just a reminder in there that we received $20.4 million, $10.2 in May of 2021. We do have one thing that we want to update, because in the second paragraph, first sentence, it mentions the second tranche. We actually did receive the other $10.2 million in June. So we're going to update that. Next page, page 2 of the actual written documents, is the use of funds. And again, just eligibility, those same things that we have covered over and over. You know, we are definitely committed, and this body and this administration has been very committed when we brought back all of our discussions on things that are eligible versus ineligible, and that we want to do our best to not knowingly place these dollars and us in jeopardy of having to reimburse by spending it in any way that was not eligible. So again, the use of funds section, the top of page 2 just goes over those again. To respond to the public health emergency or its negative economic impacts, to respond to workers performing essential work, for the provision of governmental services due to COVID public health emergency, and to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. The next section is compliance, and again, we are just referencing back a lot of the federal information. But if you look, like for instance, in the second paragraph, we're just listing the finance department as the area to help be the resource for all the other areas to help determine if the funding is being used appropriately, and if the project and the spends are going to be eligible. We're putting in writing so that it kind of helps. We're going to provide the guidance to help make sure eligible use and management of the grant funds, including special projects that require open bids, and including competitive and non-competitive procurement process, contracts and disbursements, activities requiring compliance with Davis-Bacon Act, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, Clean Air Act, record retention and reporting, and any other requirements. Basically, we're just making sure we put those big, wide categories that the federal government comes back and updates, like on an annual basis. Page 3, we have a small section, a little paragraph where we're just reminding everybody that we do have a commitment and an obligation to the IRS on a quarterly basis to do compliance reporting and to provide updates on what we've spent, how we've spent it, what's obligated and what's remaining. The next section is all about subrecipients and beneficiaries. So basically, anybody that we are giving money to, if the money was given to the city of Hagerstown as federal dollars. If we give it to any other individual group or organization, they become a subrecipient, meaning we're passing it through from us to them. The obligation to that subrecipient, because it's federal dollars, remains the same. They have to ensure that they are using applicable procurement policies. They have to ensure that they're doing everything they need to for record retention. So because we are trying to partner with so much, we're putting this specifically is one of those areas that they wanted, in writing. And again, we're going to put it out there. But page 3 and over into page 4 covers those. The big thing for us is our CDBG staff has done it for years. Whenever we give information or money to another entity, we are required and should be doing a risk analysis assessment on whomever we're giving the money. Meaning, we can't just give the money to anybody. So if there's an organization who's never ever received federal dollars, if there's an organization that is not in good standing, if there's an organization that has been disbarred for any reason on the state's website, all these things. But again, we have a checklist for that. We have it included in the appendix. It's mostly for internal staff. Not only do we have to assess that risk of the organization before we give the money, but if it is If they're gonna spend it over a year's period, then quarterly, we're having to reevaluate and make sure that nothing happens throughout that time period either. Turn the page. Again, more information on subrecipients, like I said, the expectation and the requirement that they maintain records, that they're able to give us what we need to report back on our quarterly compliance reports. The way that we will pay and reimburse those organizations and subrecipients, and at the very bottom is just the final reminder. Procurement. Just because we give the money to another organization does not mean that the organization can use it for a service without going through an open and competitive process. They can't say, you know, I wanna utilize Michelle's company for advertising. We're gonna give her all the money without going through the appropriate process to do that. Starting on page 5, we're talking about contract provisions, and specifically there, we're coming back to, this is where we're really augmenting and adding on to our city's purchasing policy. So again, all these things you see from letter A through H, contracts over $25,000, termination clause, equal employment opportunities, Davis-Bacon, Clean Air Act, suspension and debarment, Byrd anti-lobbying amendment, and civil rights compliance. All of these things aren't unique to just ARPA. They are in place for every single federal grant. The very last thing, and one thing that, a caveat that we did not include in here is BABA, Build America, Buy America. It's been strengthened. It was in place many years ago. It's come back in mid-May. They finally released some regulations on it. So when we start to look at some of our other federal grants, so like projects that we're going to be using ARC monies for, this is really going to come into play because there's a very strong component where all this information like iron, steel, manufactured products, construction materials are to be produced in the United States. And they go through these definitions of what it means, how much of a percentage of the construction materials or products must be made in the United States. It is probably going to be a very stringent, it's going to be one of those requirements that's going to be hard sometimes to meet based on the environment in which we are in for some things. Starting on page 6, it's the first appendix, and this is, again, simply that risk analysis checklist that I mentioned, because we're doing the assessment, but we don't want it to be secret. We want these organizations to understand how we're rating it and the things that we have to look for in order to give them funding. And then the next page and through the rest is all about the procurement standards, 2 CFR Part 200.317 to 200.327. Again, anytime we give federal money or anytime somebody receives federal dollars, you could have to go through a separate mandatory single audit. Just means you receive federal sources and how did you spend it. Again, not new with ARPA. All of these language has been in place for that for years. We are simply placing the language direct, word for word here so that everybody can see it, so that we're fair and open, everybody knows. And again, this is where you're going to be able to, with the links, go to that language so that you can see it. Talking again about the debarment, the Davis-Bacon, prevailing wages, when those things come into play. I think that's it. I know I talked really fast because I know.
Does Brooke have all this memorized?
Brooke, just about. Yeah. Any specific questions on that last appendix is all Brooke. Actually, at every little item, we have to go back and we have to research. So I say that, but if you quiz too hard, we'll research and come back. Again, we're not trying to make it so specific that we have to keep updating it, but we want to make it out there and make people aware. Again, we're receiving federal sources. This is all the things we have to be doing. So any questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Right up next, Stormwater Incentive Program for Surrey School Redevelopment. Jim, Rodney?
That's why I changed my major in college.
Good afternoon. The
few weeks ago, or maybe it was longer than that, I know that the developer that's looking at this, the Surrey School redevelopment project, made a presentation to council and sort of laid out their plans. And there were concerns at that time raised about the potential impact that the development would have on parking in that neighborhood, especially along Summit Avenue. And in response to that, the developer went back and looked at their plan and tried to find ways to provide more on, or off-street parking on the site. And they were able to do that to a certain extent. There's a, in the memo, it's kind of hard to see because it's small, but the last page in the memo is their, I guess, the layout that they've come up with now, revised layout, showing how they would make things fit on the site. And I think they've added, I didn't actually go back and check, but I want to say they've added between 10 and 12 spaces in the parking lot. But while they were doing that, they also looked at the rest of the design on the site, and they were actually able to find some other areas where they can do things that are a benefit to the city from a stormwater management standpoint. And these are things that go beyond what they're required to do by the stormwater ordinance. They're removing some extra pavement, they're making their stormwater treatment systems bigger than they need to be, they're putting a green roof system on part of the building. And in the stormwater management program, in our credit manual that we developed, there's actually an incentive policy that's set aside for development projects. And it's intended to encourage developers to do just what they're proposing to do. Go beyond the regulations, do more for stormwater management that the city can take some credit for with the state. And in turn, the city would consider partnering financially with them on that extra cost. So they prepared a plan and prepared a cost estimate for these extra costs that would come about if they do these extra water quality improvements. And the total cost of those extra improvements is $130,000. In our incentive policy, what we contemplated is that we would partner up to 50% on these extra costs. And every year in the stormwater budget, we set aside $250,000 for these incentive-type projects. This is actually the first one we've received since the program came in, and it was the only one that we received in this review cycle. We review these applications twice a year. So that is basically the request that Surrey LLC is making. If we would enter into an agreement with them to reimburse half of those costs, which would be $65,000 paid out of the stormwater fund. And if the council feels like that's something that you would want to do, we'll work with the city attorney to actually develop the agreements, and we'll bring it back to the council for review.
And in turn, what we get out of it are the credits for the stormwater permit that we're required to do anyway.
So, when you take into consideration the request that's made as it applies to the MS4 that we're obligated to meet, like, how do you determine that's the valuation of the credit? In other words, let's say we owe the state through that program 50 acres. And every acre is worth, I don't know, $200,000, right, worth of obligation that we've got to like spend to meet. So how do you look at the 65,000 and say it meets X amount of acreage as it applies to what you valued that acreage to be already? Is the 65,000 a good number in this case for what you're getting?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. Some parts of this are easy to evaluate. The removal of existing parking lot or impervious area, that's a direct, that comes off of
That's
our
a number.
books. That's a number. Some of the other things are a little bit harder to value, like the green roof system. It's providing treatment, but it's a little harder to
Right.
equate that to an acreage. And the same thing with the expanding the stormwater facilities. It's not as direct to value that. But I think Rodney and I reviewed this, and I think for what they're doing with the project and the benefit that the city is getting out of it, we felt that it was a reasonable request.
Yeah, I guess for me, I'd like to see, okay, by what they voluntarily did, it takes an acre off the board.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And then that acre we valued at X number of dollars, so it was worth
Right.
the dollars.
We can do that.
Versus a static 50%. Like, to me, it should be up to 50% as long as it, you know, meets the valuation of a portion of that acreage we're trying to get credit for.
You know, all the different techniques that we're trying to do to meet our obligation.
Yeah.
Tree planting, street sweeping, retrofitting, stormwater ponds, restoring streams, all those things. In the continuum of that, it's probably gonna fall somewhere in the middle, I would think, as a
Yeah.
cost per acre. But we'll definitely give you that information before we would bring you the agreement to actually approve. This is the first one.
Mhm.
You guys good with that?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have proposed code amendments to chapters 238 and 240. Hi, Nancy.
Oh, no, I got a lot of questions. For your birthday, I'll keep it short. I'll knock it down to 1 hour.
First and foremost, I want to say thank you to Kathy, who's been a great help, and Scott as well, while we work through, kind of playing devil's advocate, while we work through some of the final changes that we made to regulation, or proposed changes that we made to code. So I do want to, thank Kathy for helping me. The guidance we were given last time was transfer of allocation only permitted when existing allocation is over 1,000. I use 1,500 gallons per day as my marker in the proposed changes. When we don't permit it if it's less than 1,000. It's one time for each property regardless of whether or not there's an owner change. And then if additional allocation would be needed in the future where an allocation transfer occurred, they would be responsible for purchasing it. I included some redevelopment language as we discussed, and I also incorporated the cost differential as we discussed. I did not include, per our discussion, residential multi-properties. Everything in here is for non-residential properties, so commercial, industrial, and then the residential commercial already falls under the benefit fees and the annual review. I would also state that when we were looking at transfer of allocation, we kept it within the MRGA. We did not include transfer of allocation in the UGA. The MRGA is consistent with the comp plan and that sort of thing, and so I did not include UGA in any of the recommendations. In your packet, there is a summary sheet, or sheets. The first 2.5 pages are water, and the last 2 pages are wastewater. Where there was language in wastewater that wasn't in water that fit quite well, I included it in water. For example, on the first page, number 2, this language only appeared in chapter 240. So I incorporated it into 238 as well. It allows us to lien a property if allocation doesn't get paid, essentially. It gives some teeth to it. So anywhere that language occurred in one and didn't the other, I also incorporated, right above that, permits required was in section 240, but was not in section 238 on that page, on page 1. So we added 238.10A to be consistent between 238 and 240. If you've looked at 238 and 240, you'll see that, they're written very differently. part of it is because of the pretreatment regulations, and part of it is one's water and one's wastewater. So, we've discussed everything multiple times. I don't know, I think probably it's best if I just ask if anybody has any questions or needs clarification on any part of it. The big changes are, you know, everything is in red, the transfer of allocation in red. And like I said, it's detailed on these 5 pages and in the proposed code.
So, I mean, I read it, I'm trying to wrap my brain around 2 things. One, and Kathy might be able to answer this, is all of the other stuff associated with the annexation policy is still applicable. In other words, let's say somebody out there is looking for utility service extension, right? And of one or the other, and they're out there in the MRGA, simply because property owner A says, yeah, I'll transfer this to property owner Y. Property owner Y that is out there is still subject to all the stuff associated with the annexation policy.
Yes.
So they can't say, hey, well, I solved it because property owner A said they just give me theirs.
They still would have to be approved for the service to the utilities department, and that kicks in the pre-annexation agreement process.
Okay. So they still have to go through all the other steps.
Yes.
The second thing then associated with going from inside the municipal boundaries, and maybe not just inside the corporate limits of the city, to outside is there are 2 facets to this, i.e. quantity and, or capacity and I don't know, pressure is the right word. So in other words, and I think I've asked this the last time, I'm just trying to figure out, let's say somebody transfers it from an area where we have no issues associated with both volume and pressure, right? So let's say somebody's right next to the West End towers, and I'm just gonna use a very blatant example of it. They transfer the allocation to somebody over in the Robinwood area, where we have had concerns from folks with pressure issues. So the transfer in capacity, so that also does not give them sort of the free pass. In other words, you could still come along and say, yeah, you know, property owner A got you volume, so you can take it over here to property Y, but over here, property Y, we still have these other issues, whether it's a size of a line, the extension of the line, pressure, whatever the issue is, they've still got to go through that stuff.
Yes, there is a permit requirement incorporated into the transfer of allocation where they have to do that. But there also is they still have to go through the normal process. So if there would be system improvements required to serve that property, let's just say whether it be they need so many gallons per minute to run their to run a commercial industrial operation, or they need fire flow, they're still going to be they would still be responsible for those system upgrades.
All that other stuff, okay.
Because we're not going to upgrade the system associated with the transfer of allocation. That still falls back on the developer.
I just want to make sure that as we are walking down this sort of uncharted path, that the folks out there hearing us head down this road aren't immediately in a mode of, this is a free-for-all. You know what I mean? In opening this process. And so that gets me to my next point, maybe sort of the second part of trying to figure this out in my mind, is, and I don't know, let me use Surrey School, Maybe that's a good example. Let's say Surrey School currently has an allocation of 50,000 gallons a day, right? Because it was a school at one time and has some number. Or let's take the old school in Washington Street, which is no longer a school. They have some number that's probably well bigger than what we've seen them use in the last 20 years, right? And the way I understand it is now they have the ability, once this is passed, to have that offered up to some other property owner out there that's trying to do something with the property that wants that capacity. Is that right?
Yes.
Of a non-residential development nature?
Non-residential, yes.
Okay. So, I guess, for me, I kind of left our last discussion on this thinking we were going to evaluate all of those numbers you had on paper, and you were going to allow those numbers where there was an abundance to be sort of ratcheted back into the city's pot, if you will. And
Yes, they're the non-active accounts.
Okay.
Where transfer,
so transfer is the different animal than that, right?
transfer's a different animal.
So-
Yes.
I guess I'm just trying to frame in my mind, who's going to know that they've suddenly become private, and maybe it isn't working this way, maybe I've got it all wrong in my brain, that they're gonna suddenly become sort of the private third-party brokers of this allocable resource. I guess that's the part I'm trying to understand, you know what I mean? Are they able to just transfer it? Can they sell it? You know what I mean? And then that begs questions in my mind, well, if they've got to crawl through all the other stuff, and let's be honest, there's gonna be somebody out there that sells this, right, to somebody else, unbeknownst that they gotta go through all these other 12 steps, that suddenly they're gonna come back to us and say, wait a second, I bought this 5,000 gallons from property A. He said I was good to go. And then suddenly property Y is sitting there saying, I got this 5,000 gallon ticket I'm holding, but you're telling me I had to go through all this other stuff to spend the ticket. And
Because it doesn't happen by magic.
I know, but then we're gonna be caught in the middle of that, which is why I'm having real heartburn of it not just coming back into the city's pot. Rather you're gonna have 100 private third-party brokers out there, because when I originally, and I'm just gonna say this, we had this conversation 2+2, right? It's the only 2+2 meeting we had, and so this is sort of where some of this stemmed from. And you know, I just think it's appropriate to say that to the public. And so what we talked about was, if property A owned property A over here, and he was the same property owner of property Y over here, you know what I mean? He could send it to him or herself, not become a broker to say, hey, I've got 2,000 gallons here, you know, who's the highest bidder? Like, that to me is gonna get weird real fast.
Yeah, we will have.
And that's what I'm trying to figure out, because that's how this verbiage reads, except for those specific cases, which I still don't have a real good understanding of, where it says it will come to mayor and council, because I have to tell you, while I certainly appreciate that it brings it to this body for those specific cases, I had envisioned this being a practical application, and no offense to my counterparts here, and not a political application. And I don't.
I think that if anybody wants to take allocation out of the city and shoot it out beyond our boundaries, that it should be a political application. Because it's potentially depleting our ability to
I
serve
agree.
the city.
Which is why I don't think it should be in there in the first place. I just think it should all come back to the city pot. And then we decide, as it, you know, how it goes out. No differently than because I'm just, I don't know what's assigned to the hospital property, as an example, right now. But somebody is going to own some components of those, and they're going to become a broker of a sizable volume, and could be brokering it to like 30 other parties. And that to me just sounds
Well,
like
There's two
it gets
things-
weird.
Yeah, there's two things going on. I guess, you know, from the first thing is the initial allocation back in the 90s was assigned, okay? It
Right.
was divvied out so existing customers at that time did not purchase their allocation.
Right.
So when we talk about looking at accounts, and what we primarily talked about was looking at the non-active accounts, but there's active accounts that we're
Okay.
gonna look at too. And taking back, because code allows us to take back some portion of that assigned allocation. Okay, so that part.
That wasn't bought.
That wasn't bought, that
So
the city
is the transfer just talking about the component of allocation that was bought at this point?
Because
Because that's very important, because I don't see that in here.
Yeah, with a couple words, yes, we can do that. And that would affect some active as well as non-active accounts. We can do that. But.
Because I don't have, and I apologize, I want to get, I don't have as much heartburn if somebody bought it, you know what I mean, at some point, and we actually sold it to them, because we sold it. So at this point, yeah, it is theirs to sort of sell to who they want, but I want to make sure that we're differentiating, that it isn't something that was simply provided at some point as part of the development process, because to me, that, none of that's guaranteed. Zero of that is guaranteed
We can,
over the course of time.
I have that list of accounts, and we can
Okay.
flag those accounts as, and so I can incorporate in, the transfer of allocation, which it's on page 2 for water. I can incorporate in there, language that says for allocation that was assigned, when this policy went into effect, which went into effect on April 17th in 1990, that allocation cannot be transferred.
Right.
Yeah, I guess to me,
That's
I'm much
simple.
more comfortable if somebody, bought and paid for something, that they have the ability at that point, because we either gotta buy that back, you know what I mean?
Right.
Or it's theirs as a commodity to
And if
sell.
you flag it, it would be seen when that new account is established, that what the allocation, whether it was bought or whether it was just given, and then what that
Yeah.
new allocation would be.
Yeah, we would flag, what I would recommend doing is that we flag all of the assigned,
Assigned,
non-residential.
Right.
Where we're looking at 1,900 accounts total in our system. And, one of the things that we're doing, one of the things that we're working on is how much of that allocation can we take back right now? But I can, I'll actually make that letter A, and on this one, number 1, on the other one, that assigned allocation, at the time the benefit fee policy went into place, cannot be transferred.
Yeah, for me, it's real simple. Like, I think that there are 3 items here, right? There is a property owner that bought allocation, okay? They have the ability to sell, in my mind. And I think it's important for the development community to hear this, at least from me, where I stand on these 3 items. The first is, if you bought and paid for it, you should be able to sell that. Because you're taking the risk from the property you're selling it from, that you're depleting the resource you have available for your property. You know what I mean? That's their own
I would
risk.
still have a concern if they're taking it and.
Oh, yeah, I still think that outside the city, they have to come to us and go through all that other steps, but I think they should be eligible to have that opportunity, at least the opportunity. The second entity, I think, should be able to have the opportunity, and this is a bit more of a stretch, is if property owner A wants to take it from his or her property at property A and transfer it to his or her property owner, you know what I mean, from a property they own to a property they own. That so I don't have consternation with either of those scenarios.
Okay,
It is the assigned or assumed that to me, that's a no way. Like, that comes back to the city pot, and we distribute it like you're saying for the, I forget what you called them earlier. Not unassigned,
the purchased out.
no, the non-used. Yeah, inactive.
The inactive.
To me, that goes back to that same pot.
Correct.
But those other 2, 2 out of those 3 scenarios, I would be comfortable with in language in this, again, with the caveat that if you're taken outside of the city, yeah, you know.
Outside, well, yeah, we were saying outside of the MRGA.
There's got language in there about if you're transferring from MRGA to MRGA, then I guess it's just administrative, or city to city it's administrative, but if you're going from city out,
Right.
then it needs to be, with,
Yeah.
with recommendations of staff and approval
Yeah.
of your council.
Yeah.
As long as there's something that says you still have to do all the other stuff.
Right.
You know, if you're
Yeah.
if you're outside, if you're outside of the city and you've got this property that's in the MRGA outside of the city, and you're taken to a property outside of the city that's still in the MRGA, you don't get to bypass that point. Like, if you're right next to the city, you know, you still gotta go through,
Yeah, there might not
That
even be pipes
process.
out at that other property.
right? So,
It's not magic, you gotta have the infrastructure.
so those are the 2 of the 3 that I would be comfortable with, and I don't read, I definitely agree with how we're heading down this road, I just don't read that in this language.
Yeah, the assigned allocation cannot be transferred, that's an easy fix.
Okay.
And of course, the property owner bought allocation, that's really what this is addressing anyway. So, but I'll make sure we put clear in there.
Differentiate.
Yeah.
And I think these are baby steps, and I think it's appropriate for them to be baby steps.
Yeah, and then, I just, for the second, property owner, if somebody owns property A and property B, they can transfer from property A to property B, but that is, example you gave is same property owner. So
Yeah.
I just clarification.
Because I feel like the property owner that bought it, or the property owner that's transferring it to some other property they own, in both cases, they're taking their own risk.
So, I guess, the question I have is, if you have property owner 1 and property owner 2, 2 different property owners, and property owner 1 has excess allocation and he wants to, they approach the city, they complete the permit application, we go through our checklist. Can property owner 1 transfer to property owner 2, 2 different owners?
Only if he bought it.
Only if he bought it.
That's
Okay,
where
that's
I'm-
where I
that's-
needed clarification.
That's where I'm at.
Must be bought.
Only if
Yeah.
he's bought it.
Okay,
Or someone in the prior chain of title.
Yeah, if
It was purchased
if it's owned,
allocation.
yeah. But if it was assigned at some point because we did some analysis and said, well, property X is using 100,000
Then that's
gallons a day,
ours.
and that's what it's assigned, and now they're only using 20 and they want to send that other 80, to me, that's a no way.
yeah, we're already evaluating them to pull them
Right.
back into,
Okay.
if you will, our pot.
Right.
But
Okay.
that's, clarification. And, I don't want to, at the 13th hour, I just want to make sure, and I think Kathy and I felt very strongly about this, as did Scott. We intentionally left the UGA out because it's beyond the reach of our comp plan. And I just want to make sure, that you can't transfer from the city, from the MRGA into the UGA. That already falls under anything in the UGA already
Yeah.
falls under mayor and council
That opens up
authority.
a huge can of worms. if we
It
allow that.
does, and I think honestly that if you want to do something like that in the future, we might be able to do it through the water and wastewater policy and looking at that where it comes back to the mayor and council anyway, but I just want to be clear on the UGA.
I feel like that's a step way down the road.
Yep,
Okay,
That boundary needs to shrink.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Unless water really is magic.
That's
it needs to
correct.
shrink.
yeah.
so you make those changes, and being it's voted on next week,
yeah, if Jason and Ann can get the ordinances ready in that amount of time, yes.
and just
Other-
make sure it's noted that the changes have been made, and, okay.
Yep,
Thank you.
thank you.
Up next, licensing of hotels. Hi, Paul.
Right, so our department has been here before to talk about this in 2017 and 2018 about potentially licensing hotels. The concern still remains the same, that some of our hotels maintain some standards that are not meeting code for fire and property maintenance. Also, that the staff lack the knowledge for fire protection, for evacuation purposes or emergency incidences. Also, the hotels are being used as an extended stay, which is not what they were designed for. Also, some of these hotels are dwelling units and rooming houses that are not in the appropriate zoning districts. Also, the hotels are not in good standing with the state, county, and city taxes or with utilities. Additionally, since that time period, we've seen an increase in calls for service from our police and fire departments and also our code department as well for responding to these places. So since last time, we still did research on what other jurisdictions are doing, not only in Maryland, but across the country. We have them listed out as far as Annapolis, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, College Park, Gaithersburg, Howard County, Laurel, Rockville, are ones that had programs back in 2018. Ones that have been added to licensed hotels in Montgomery County. Ocean City actually licensed them before, but they just recently updated their program here in 2022. Also Salisbury added it, and also Frederick County actually doesn't license hotels, but they do require certain human trafficking certifications to be done by their hotels for all their staff to understand things. So as you've heard tonight, a lot of the programs in front of us here with the indoor complex. I was talking about a number of stays in our hotels. We had the Civil War Heritage also talking about people coming to our hotels. People are going to be coming to our hotels. We need to make sure there's a standard that's being met so that people feel comfortable coming to our community and staying here and using our facilities that we're providing to everyone. So we have 12 hotels in Hagerstown with the annexations we recently had and one new one being built. So we have 1,223 rooms currently in Hagerstown that people can rent from. Some of the things to consider when we've reviewed these other jurisdictions is that human trafficking training for the staff, that's something that they would do. Also overdose response program training, that I got from the health department. I met with them when they were providing some Narcan training for our staff that we talked about what is not being done in maybe hotels, and they said that they could turn down all the time by all the hotels to get Narcan training for their staff. Also a guest registry, requiring them, that would not only be beneficial for just knowing who's in the hotel, but if there was an evacuation needed by a fire department situation, they know who's in the hotel and how many people need to be accounted for. Also prohibitions on hourly rates for hotels and motels. Also having where real estate, property taxes, and utilities are current at the time of application. It's not saying that they pay them immediately, it's just at the time of application, they would be current on those requirements for taxes and also for utilities. While we did the research, we couldn't find any program that just flat out exempted hotels based on either what hotel chain they were associated with or that they were newly constructed or anything along those lines. There was nothing that just flat out exempted program or exempted hotels. College Park does have a biennial program where if you meet certain standards, you get inspections once every other year, but there was no program out there that actually just exempted hotels. We did have Benbrook, Texas, that did do a tiered program that we could find. There was none in the state of Maryland, but this place in Texas did have one. And if the council was looking to do a tiered program to maybe not penalize those hotels that are maintaining a good standard in our community, but maybe penalize the ones that are having more calls for service or not meeting certain fire protection standards, we did put together a proposal that tier 1 standard would be somewhere where the fire inspection was conducted within the last year. At the time of application, they have no current violations and that they're fully sprinklered. So when I'm saying at the time of application, that means, let's say the fire department did an inspection here in July and they had found a couple of things that are wrong. We were proposing a license year going from from January 1 to December 31st. So basically, the hotel would have 5 months to make any repairs that would need to be done to their fire system before application time period would come, so they would have no violations, that they took the steps to make the corrections. And also, the one thing that Benbrook, Texas did is that they looked for calls for service per year or per room per year. So they were saying if you're less than 1 call for service per room per year, then you were in the tier 1 program. They'd be evaluated annually. They're saying a tier 2 program would be something where the fire department did an inspection within the last year, or if it's greater, if they denied these inspections, that they do have current violations, or if it's not a fully sprinklered building. Chief Lord couldn't be here tonight, but we already know where the chief stands on a lot of that, and he wants to see these hotels sprinklered. So if you were not sprinklered hotel, you would automatically go into a tier 2, and then also it would be a 1.0 or greater calls for service per room per year situation, again, evaluated annually. The evaluation would have to occur, though, at a little bit different time, not from January 1 to December 31st, because we would have to get the applications out before that time period for a renewal time period. So that's something that can be worked out with an ordinance. The inspections, like we said, the fire department already does these annually. If we were looking at any type of tiered program or any inspections associated with it, with the code office doing that as well, it'd be establishing some sort of standard. Right now, if the fire department sees some issues, they contact us to go out and do an inspection. But if we were looking to penalize hotels for not maintaining a certain standard, then annual inspections by the code department should be done as well. Also, if we're looking at an ordinance, there should be suspension and revocation considerations, so that there could be ways to either limit the number of people that continue to stay at a property if a license was suspended, or if it was revoked, that the hotel would maybe be either evacuated for not having any more guests until they corrected all the issues for life safety purposes. Also, there could be fines associated with things if they were meeting certain training standards. If we put certain things in place, there could be fines associated with it well. The one thing that during with all of these reviews is that we also have bed and breakfasts, which I don't think we have any in Hagerstown. I'm not aware of any. You aware of
I
any?
don't think so anymore.
I don't think so anymore.
We used to have a couple.
Well, we do have short-term rentals that are here in Hagerstown. These other jurisdictions do license these types of properties, especially the short-term rentals. They can pop up anywhere. Now, bed and breakfast, as Kathy can elaborate more on, but basically, if they're going into certain zoning districts in Hagerstown, which they're not in every zoning district, it would be through special exception through a Board of Zoning Appeals hearing. They would be able to have
If they're in a
it.
residential district.
If they're in a residential district.
Is short-term rentals at an Airbnb?
Yes, so short-term rentals are Airbnbs, VBRO, or VRBO, whatever they are. And when I attended a webinar on those, there was over 300 plus sites out there to advertise on to rent a room to someone. So there's no way to monitor all those different sites. There's just no way. But it would be one of those, a lot of jurisdictions have it where if you want to put in a short-term rental like an Airbnb, you have to get the neighbors notified. Not saying you have to get their approval, but you have to notify the neighbors. I'll tell you that if people are doing them in our community, they're calling us and the neighbors did not know they were in their community. So they're trying to let us know that, hey, there's someone renting next door. Currently, as it goes, if they rent the whole entire building, it's put underneath the rental licensing program. But if someone is renting just out a room or two, we do not monitor that. That is something that the homeowners can just do. A lot of communities are starting to regulate these more because they're finding that it is creating calls for service for their agencies to respond to places. And then one of the other things to consider if we were going to create a program is the Chapter 95 excessive use of city services. Currently, we have set up for commercial properties that if there's 8 calls for service in a 12-month time period, they could be considered a chronic nuisance property, but we could come up with a established standard for hotels, such as the same for large apartment complexes. Depending on how many rooms a hotel has, we could have a certain standard of calls for service could go up before it's considered a chronic nuisance property. Also, the habitual offender ordinance, we did broaden that in 2016 to include other different programs. We could include the hotel program as well. Habitual offender makes it where it's a misdemeanor. Most of these other ones are fines or fees that are associated with the property. A misdemeanor is a little bit more serious charge that could be done against the property owner if they weren't maintaining the property. So we kind of propose a lot of ideas to you. I won't propose anything myself. This is more like an a la carte. The mayor and council gets to kind of decide on where we want to go to move forward on this. If we want to move forward in the hotel licensing, what would you want to see in this type of program? And then we can work with the attorneys on it. We know nothing's going to be perfect for every property owner out there. It's just what's right for our community and for our visitors. So I leave it all to you to tell me what would you like in a program.
I have a lot of things to say. One, I think we absolutely need to do something, right? And I think it's very apparent. You can go in and you can walk into any hotel in this city and know which ones are doing it right and which ones are doing it wrong. And I understand the concern coming from the ones that are doing it right, which why should they be penalized by the ones that are doing it wrong? So I hear that, and I like the tiered approach. I think we need to figure out a way to solve that issue. With that said, the ones that are doing it wrong, it is repulsive what is happening in some of these hotels. And it's unfair to the citizens that are living there. It's much better than living under a bridge, I give them that, but these people are paying more than my mortgage to stay in these hotels in places where they don't have life safety things that should be in place. They don't have kitchens, they don't have all of these things. But if we do a calls for service ordinance, what's gonna happen is that they're gonna stop calling HPD. I know that for a fact because one hotel down on Dual Highway now does not allow their residents to call for overdoses or else they get kicked out. I know that for a fact. I've been there, I've seen it myself. So they have people staying awake watching them while they're using drugs to make sure if they overdose that they can save them by Narcan, knowing that if they call 911, they will be displaced the next day. That's disgusting and should be illegal, and I'm fairly certain is illegal, but no one speaks up because their next best option is to live back on the street again. So my concern with making it calls for service is that what's gonna happen is we're not gonna get calls for service on things that we should get calls for service on, and that's gonna cost people's lives. So I think we need to find a delicate balance there, and that, it hurts my heart that I even had to say that out loud, but that's a very real reality of what's happening in at least 2 hotels that I know of. So that would be my fear of implementing something like that.
See, I think about the calls for service that if you live in housing, right? Like if you live in housing and your police are called to your unit 3 times, then you could be evicted from housing. And so I don't really see it being, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, I really don't see.
It makes sense if it didn't have an adverse reaction.
I understand,
Yeah.
but at the same time, that rule is still in place for people that use the police excessively, or that it's a common nuisance. And so I think that something should go into play whenever a hotel gets constant calls. And I understand that they'll stop calling, but you think about places like Potomac Towers where there's things going on, and if they're on their second call to police, they don't call because, you know, they don't want to get kicked out, and that happens with people in their residence. And I think as a business, you should be held to the same standard and even higher.
Do you know how many flagship hotels we have versus privately owned?
I don't know where they are as far as ownership goes. I think a lot of the hotels are owned by individuals. It's what chain they may be associated with.
It could be a franchisee or a private owner.
Don't some of the flagship hotels, the franchisees, aren't there regulations that they also have to follow? That was one of the things that we talked about in 2017 that was kind of the issue as to why we didn't move forward. And I ask because is it fair for a tier system in that respect? Like if you're a flagship hotel and you go through all the things, you're in one, and without having the calls for service. Because there is it's a different type of hotel, just like you said.
I agree-ish, because Days Inn, that's a flagged hotel. Have you ever walked in there?
I just wonder what their policy is as far as inspection, calls for service, things like that.
Yeah.
Versus like,
I mean, you can look at the calls for service on this list, and it's very apparent, the difference.
yeah, right, I know.
And the one that
I
is
know.
lower, that should be strikingly higher, is the one that does not allow the call or they displace, so.
Right,
This is not okay.
no.
I just think it's a delicate balance, but
Well, and don't stop at just those that are being placed there. Look at the Traveler, that we get emails at least one a week from folks saying, you know, how in the world can you allow this place that they found on Travelocity or somewhere that has the beautiful pictures, and then they show up and it's, you know, it's less than that. Those are also the other consideration that we have to make, because that stuff goes out there and gets, you know, and gets seen. And especially if we're going to be doing all of these things, the field house, the stadium, you know, these things that are going to generate tourism, they have to have a place to stay, and we want them to stay here. We don't want them to stay someplace else.
Well, and that's exactly my concern, because I saw it firsthand, picking someone up who was working with social services agencies here to better themselves. And when I was going to pick her up, there was a softball team checking in, and I thought, I can only imagine what these parents are thinking. I can only imagine. And
Well-
it is a concern.
It's pretty clear that the line is clear
when you look at these numbers. You know what I mean? So I just feel like, we can come up with a pretty good figure.
Right.
You got 3 years worth of data that says, these are the locations, no matter what we do, are going to be the places we know
Right.
about. My question is, when I read this entire document, what happens? It's one thing to say, we go to a place and there, let's say it's 2 units, and you deem the property, non-inhabitable, right? Or in violation of something. And what staff's emails to us end up with every time with one of these large places are 2 things. One, some organization put a bunch of folks in a place that has a bunch of rooms, right? That's the one thing we hear over and over. And so you have a private organization trying to do good, putting folks in a property that is less than livable. That's the first thing. That's the first email. The second email we always get is, staff have worked diligently to make this place meet the absolute minimum standards so that 100 folks weren't removed overnight. And so I just read this entire document and go, okay, we're gonna put this in place, but what's the leeway and what's the consequence? I just have to understand that, because when I look at these several places, I'm thinking, okay, you're gonna have organizations that are gonna still place people there. You're gonna have property owners that are still gonna manage the property the way they manage it. But what happens when you actually go, because what this is going to do is actually gonna shut the door on, 400 rooms worth of places.
And just like the last
in a
time when we
fellowship.
shut it down, we have to have a plan on
Yeah,
what to do,
There has to be.
what's next.
Yeah.
Right, but, and I guess, the organizations that place people there aren't at this table.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't know that they're gonna be on this board, or on board with this, and so, like, that part isn't going to stop. But the answer can't be that staff comes back and says, okay, we're made aware of this, and we did, we did this Herculean effort to just get folks, occupiable.
No,
Because to
right.
me, that's standard. I mean, that's exactly why we put rental registration in place, is because Carol Muller sat right here beside me and said, hey, I've seen some of these places that you're showing me on this screen, and that isn't how we should allow property owners to be permitted to provide housing for people. And so I think we've reached that point with these hotels. I just want to know what the answer is.
Wouldn't you think that the organizations that do place these individuals there would also want a better standard of living for the for the people that they place?
I agree.
Like the life safety?
But when this staff goes in and does this, the same response is gonna happen over again. Now we've got an extra sort of
Layer.
tool to do it, to really do it. It's not, you didn't pay your water and sewer bill, or the fire alarm isn't working. It's, you've got this real tool, right? And so they're gonna come back and say, hey, we can't do this because we've made the decision as an organization to place 100 individuals here. So you can't do this because we've made this decision. So all I'm saying is I feel like other parties, that aren't the hotel and motel owners are gonna need to have an awareness that this train is leaving the station. And I just wanna know what the answer to that is. Because in that case, where there were, 176 units could have been shut overnight, there was no plan. There was no plan among dozens of organizations within this community to rectify placement of those individuals in that circumstance.
Well, it cost CAC $22,000.
That's what I'm saying.
So they need to be in the conversation, because we do
Or
have
on
to
board.
think of what's next. I think
Maybe not
we'll
on
be
board,
board.
just
It's what happens
acutely
when.
aware
Yeah.
that this is the direction we're going out of necessity, you know, and, you know, we talked about it last time, I feel like every time we talk about it, we're even later to the game. This is, we're not some unique jurisdiction that says we need to do this because it's unique to us. We're literally late to the game at this point.
I think we can do that. I think we can, I think we have to. I think we're to the point we have to. And it's not to punish, it's not to punish anybody, it's not to make money off of anybody.
It's just unacceptable.
It-
But it can't be 8 calls.
But it can't-
It's like, to me, like, I
Right.
look at this and go, okay, it's not an apartment building, it can't be 8 calls.
No.
I agree with you, I think it has to be some egregious number.
Yeah.
And you're gonna get there. I mean, I hear the notion that people are gonna stop, and maybe you say, you know, these calls aren't what we're looking for, like, I'm looking for disruption, you know. You know, yeah.
Again, I think we need, I like the calls for service. That was just my fear of what will happen.
Yeah.
Because it already is in one particular
It's
place.
like someone has like some, you know, a conscious
Private business.
call.
But I do like that, human trafficking training program, because you know how we're just uniquely centered around all these major highways. And that's something that should be considered anyway.
And the one thing is that the State General Assembly did pass a law this last General Assembly session to require different training for hotels. So if we were doing something along those lines, we could align it with what the state law that was passed. It goes into effect October 1 of this year.
Paul, am I missing something, or is the Dagmar not on this chart?
It's not a hotel.
It's not a hotel, it's listed as a rooming house with the city of Hagerstown.
So is that, does that apply, will that apply?
It's already in the rental licensing program as a
rental
rooming
licensing
house.
program. Okay.
And they do have kitchens in that facility, unlike the hotels that are not extended stay hotels. They're acting like extended stay hotels.
So it doesn't apply
It
then?
doesn't apply. No, when I've talked to.
That's where a lot of the individuals go. I mean, that's the.
What, yeah.
One of the concerns was always where school buses are at our hotels. That's always a conversation that comes up. Why are the school buses at our hotels? Because if a person is displaced and they are going to a hotel to stay, the schools will make sure that the kids still attend their home-based school. So they will pick them up from those schools, from the hotels, to take them to their schools.
It's several hundred kids in
Wow.
Washington County.
Oh,
that
yeah.
live
And-
in
Oh,
Washington.
absolutely.
Several hundred kids.
And their concern is that these hotels do not have amenities for them to reside in these places for an extended period of time to still meet certain standards of living that are good conditions for the children.
Also, in a lot of these hotels, if you stay there by the week or by the month, you are not offered the same services as someone who would stay there for a night. You have to take your own trash out, you have to clean your own room, you have to change your own sheets, and you're only allowed once a week, not every day, not more than once a week. I mean, it's
It's just
outrageous.
it's unacceptable.
It's unacceptable, and it's unfair to the people who are in that circumstance.
Yeah. No one should have to live like that.
So if you let us go back and work on it based upon the input here, let us go back and work on it, and then bring back to you, perhaps within the month, a draft that we could present to you all, and then go from there, and
Yes.
then we'll pick that apart.
Well, throw for clarification, is there any ideas that were thrown out that we wouldn't want to see in something that we could pick and choose later, so that we could go with what was kind of out there as potential à la carte type of items of things as far as the human trafficking training, overdose training, paying your taxes on time, paying your utilities on time, things along those lines, no hourly rates.
Yeah, some of those are
different things.
just standard stuff.
It should be. It was actually a place in Michigan that had no hourly rates. There's
Yeah.
no Maryland.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing
No
legal
hourly
is
rates.
happening without the rates.
And what I handed out was, just for clarification for anyone that might be watching, was
Yes,
just
sir.
chain-based companies for hotels, who the holding company is for any hotel in Hagerstown, that Councilmember McIntyre asked about, that those are ones the holding company are. What the categorization is for the holding company, not so much what you might categorize it as yourself, it might be just what the holding company categorizes the chain as, and then also if they were not associated with a chain, if they have multiple hotels underneath that brand name.
Would it be a possibility to include maybe Bowman Hospitality Group in the conversation, like during the research that you do, or one of the other larger hotels, just to make sure?
We did send them the packet.
Okay, good.
I think it's important to understand franchisees, especially those that are franchisees, what their requirements are.
Right.
When they're inspected.
Like, I would
A lot
like
of-
to hear from, exactly.
Yeah, coming from that world, we would sometimes go in and do a surprise inspection, sometimes it'd be scheduled. The training that's offered, a lot of times it's just straight up ADA training. I don't know that there are additional trainings like, Narcan training or disruptive customer type training, those kinds. I think it's important to understand
I do too.
those two, so that we're not, doing a double jeopardy type of thing.
Yeah.
When we did that previously back in 2018, it was a very locked down, we can't tell you what our inspection standards are because that is a chain thing that we do not want to disclose that
Because we were
information.
thinking if we knew, then we could quickly say, okay, you drop out.
Right.
But there was pushback. But
Maybe it's a new day.
I found two on Google last week, so.
Right, we do have some. I do have
Yeah.
some from 2018. Now, they
Yeah.
could have updated some of their standards during that time period, but I do have some from 2018.
And if we can't find out, then I think that is just a way of saying, well, here's what we
Here's what
need
we're
to
gonna
know.
do.
Right.
I think you
Right.
can walk in a room and figure it out very quickly. I mean, if you've ever been
Yeah.
in some of these.
And I think consensually, we like the tiered approach. Are we looking at fees for one tier and no fees for another tier, fees for both tiers, if we're looking at any type of ordinance?
I think if there's a tier one that is meeting all the standards and is doing what they're supposed to do, and I don't think there's a need for fees.
I don't think that there should be a fee for a
Yeah,
town tier.
Why penalize them? Because realistically, we shouldn't have to do this, but unfortunately, we do, so I
I
don't
think the
think you
fees
penalize
potentially
those
comes
at
on the
all.
back end for non-compliance.
I agree.
One other question. So in staff, implementing something like this can handle, because I know you guys are pretty busy. You gonna make Steve Bachmiller do it? Because he's really busy.
Yeah, that's a plan.
Look, he's,
Yeah.
yes, he can't wait. So-
The hotels, we have 12 of them. With the staff that we currently have in place, it's over 3 zones for inspectors. So it would be a little bit balanced. One would be a little overwhelmed, but if we're looking at some with the tier 1, tier 2 standards where it might not have certain inspections with it, it's not going to have that large of an impact on us. The fees associated with it would not be hiring anyone. It would just be the penalization for having a subpar hotel in Hagerstown.
And I apologize, I do have one other question. Does the county have any kind of licensing for their hotels, or do they have as many issues, like some of those hotels like near the Valley Mall, is that ours?
They have
They have some hotels that
Some
are
are,
being
some are.
used this way.
State line?
Yeah.
They have hotels being used this way. Do they have a licensing program
Or-
along those lines? They don't really have a licensing program, but they do have things in place that they're looking at for short-term rentals that they are establishing. There are some standards have to go through
They've
the
already done something
BZA
with zoning for that.
right, for some approvals through the BZA. So they have some things in place already for approvals in locations.
Because I know some of their hotels have issues also. So
Yeah.
it'd be nice to have something consistent across the county.
And just before you go, I'd like to make a statement, because I'm sure that there are people watching that are gonna say the same thing they say every time this subject comes up, but these are private businesses. These are not city-owned businesses. We can't just go in and be like, guess what? You can't be a hotel anymore. So I just wanted to put that out there, because I hear it all the time. I don't understand why you guys let that go on. You need to shut it down. It's not that easy. It's a private business. So this is our attempt to try to help curb that activity. Just a statement.
What about the idea of, if we had like a, sort of a wall of shame idea for the internet? These are the hotels in our community that are on the bottom tier.
I would
So-
say,
Stay here at your own risk.
send me in there with a
You know,
GoPro.
short of making head spin out there, there are places that do the rating system right on the door when you walk in, especially restaurants. I don't know. I know, not saying, I see, you can hear the rumble of heads exploding right now, but, at some point, when does it get to that? Because I know if I'm walking up with my family and I walk to the door and it says, this hotel is rated, 2 stars out of 5, then I'm gonna think,
And you paid for
that
your
might
room.
make that hotel want to up their game a
And if
little
you
bit.
paid for your hotel room through one of these travel services, and you
Yeah.
get in there and you're confronted with a mess, you're out of luck.
Don't
Yeah.
we have a standard in order to be able to do that online,
But-
like the
but the-
different travel?
But the thing is like, this APM Inn and Suites, which is the top, right? The top
Yeah.
hotel. A month ago on Google has a 4 out of 5 star review with the little restaurant attached, has great pies and
Then
cakes, the
make it-
coffee shop, but I'm just saying, so the wall of shame isn't gonna, that's not
Well, the
where people are gonna
restaurant
look, they're gonna look here, and they
It's
see
good.
4 out of 5 and pop.
So it was a coffee shop.
Right, the AC worked great in the room. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, when you look it up, people are gonna, now mind you, they have a 2.2 Google review, but still, I'm just saying.
Plus, there's nothing to stop the hotel owner from posting on
That's
there
right.
about how wonderful their hotel is.
Right.
That's right.
About that.
Just,
Let us go work on it, and we'll bring it back to you and then discuss this some more. But it's something that, it was kind of, I kind of instigated it a little bit, so if anybody wants to shoot arrows at the Alamo, they can shoot at me.
It's necessary,
No,
Scott.
it's needed.
So-
No, it is definitely
Needed
needed.
discussion.
We have to do what we can.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
That's ridiculous.
Paul gets bazookas at him, so I'll be happy to take the arrows on this
It's
one.
unfair.
Review
It's
of the
unfair.
Alms House addition to the competitive negotiated sale program. Welcome.
Good evening. Just a little bit of background on 239 North Locust Street, or the Alms House. Just get this ahead real quick. The city has owned the Alms House, which is located at 239 North Locust Street, since its acquisition in November of 2004 for $90,000, which were funds from the CIP fund balance. $85,000 of state community legacy grant funds were awarded to the city to assist with some minor stabilization and repair work at the building. The Alms House currently has a landmark zoning overlay, which was adopted by mayor and council in 2009. And the property's been vacant under city ownership, and last occupancy is estimated in the 1970s based on prior research. The property had previously been included in the competitive negotiated sale list from 2013-14 through June of 2021. And depending on use, staff estimate approximately $700,000 to $1 million would be needed to fully renovate the building. The property was removed from the competitive negotiated sale list last year to pursue an evaluation of potential renovation and reuse of the building. There was a proposed use of the building included a potential Hagerstown Police Department substation with space, neighborhood-based activities, a community room, and outreach space. The primary funds for the project came from community development block grant sources, and the Alms House Rehabilitation Project is a planned activity in the Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan. The funding in the annual action plan was originally estimated at $400,000 and adjusted $362,642 after entitlement award notice was received. Note that the funds would need to be repurposed, which requires a public notice if you were to look to add the property into the competitive negotiation sale process. And a little summary of the competitive negotiation sale process is a process that facilitates the sale of city-owned properties with the goal of returning the property to the private sector for redevelopment and highest and best use. City of Hagerstown makes the real estate available for purchase and redevelopment. Department of Community and Economic Development coordinates the process and accepts purchase applications, and mayor and council identify properties to be offered for the sale and ultimately approve any development, concept, and purchase. So we're requesting mayor and council's direction on adding the Alms House to the CNS program.
With the interest given in buildings in our city right now, I don't see why not. My 2 cents.
It's a solid structure.
It is a solid structure. The end. Buy it. I don't see anything wrong. I think it's fine to put it on there.
Yeah.
What's it hurt?
I'm fine with putting it on there.
Okay.
So we're not doing anything with it now, right?
Correct. We'd have to go back and repurpose those funds, so we'd have to put a public notice out there for the CDBG funds that are currently allocated through the action plan right now. So there's a time element to that, but okay. Okay.
And expansion of the enterprise zone?
So city staff have been working with Washington County staff on a joint application to renew and expand the enterprise zone that currently exists in the city of Hagerstown and Washington County. A little background on the enterprise zone is it provides property tax credits for construction or rehabilitation investments and provides income tax credits for job creation. So what we're looking for is support of an application for renewal and expansion. We're going to have a public hearing on August 9th to conduct a special session for completed public hearing, and then on the 23rd, a special session to adopt a resolution. A little bit of history on the designation is implemented in 1992, renewed in 2002 and 2012, and then we expanded it last year for some additional acreage. There are currently 37 enterprise zones in the state of Maryland, and the town of Hancock also has an enterprise zone designation in Washington County. Quick summary of eligibility for the enterprise zone requirements is you have to create at least $5,000 of construction rehabilitation or one new job in the city center, or $50,000 of construction rehabilitation investment, or 5 new jobs outside the city center. Some eligible business types include manufacturing, warehousing, research and development, a corporate or regional office, service industries, or mercantile or retail in the city center. The two components of the incentive is a real property tax credit that impacts both city and county taxes. It's a tiered structure. The first 5 years are 80% of any change in assessed value, and then year 6 to 70%, it decreases 10% through each year, so year 10 would be a 30% reduction. The state of Maryland also reimburses each local jurisdiction 50% of the revenue as a loss of the enterprise zone real property tax credit. So this is a unique economic development tool where the city, county, and state all participate in the investment. The second benefit is the income tax credit. So it's a benefit that the state provides of either $1,000 or up to $6,000 for disadvantaged workers for any new time employees that are created based on the investment. So a little review of the process and timeline is every year the state receives applications on April 15th or October 15th. The application requirement from the city of Hagerstown includes a map and description of proposed enterprise zone boundaries, a demonstration of a public hearing, and a resolution from this body. So the schedule, we're here today at the work session to just introduce the renewal and application. Advertisements will go out for the public hearing the next 2 Tuesdays. The special session for the public hearing will be on August 9th, with the record being open for those 10 days through the 19th, with a special session on the 23rd. The application is then due by October 15th, which the county will submit to State Commerce. Washington County Commissioners are expected to hold their public hearing on August 16th. The expansion of the enterprise zone, I'm going to get into some of the maps outlining the current area and expansion areas in a second, but the average rate of unemployment has to be at least 150% for a greater rate of unemployment in the state for a period of 18 months. Population in the area has to qualify as a low-income or poverty area, or 70% of the families in the area have incomes less than 80% of the median family income for a political subdivision. Population has decreased by 10%. The most 2 recent censuses. The areas that we're looking to expand don't necessarily include these census tract status, but they're very, very close, and there's a reasonable proximity that the state allows, and we believe that the areas that we're proposing would be within a reasonable distance. So I do have a few maps, and this is a map of the current enterprise zone in the orange. The expanded areas are the green areas. There's going to be 4 focus areas that we're looking at. So this is the first one on First Street, really. This does include some residential, and the current enterprise zone does have some residential included in it. The enterprise zone has to be contiguous to its current form. So we did have to go through a block there on First Street to get to a contiguous status, to get to some industrial properties on Pope Street, the Pope area. The second one would be, right, again, this follows First Street. This is all an industrial area, and I'll get into some zoning maps here in a second. The third addition area is the majority of the Hagerstown Industrial Park. As you go south on Frederick, there's some city-owned land and a ConAgra plant, and then across Antietam, there is the industrial mixed use north of Edgewood that we're including. And then the fourth would be between Burhans and Washington Street with some industrial areas and some commercial local. So again, here are the maps from a zoning perspective. You can see that we're going out there to get to that industrial and commercial areas to the west. For addition area 2, it's the industrial and the POM areas. To the north, you can see the shaded diagonal area is the current configuration of the enterprise zone. And this is the industrial area, and then institutional zoning that we'd be looking to include from addition area 3. And then, again, north of Burhans there is the industrial and commercial local areas that we're looking to include. This is just a statistical area showing the census tracts that currently configure where the enterprise zone is or we're looking to expand. And this is just a vicinity map showing some of the different industrial parks and landmarks around the city and county. So just looking to consensus to keep moving forward with the application for a public hearing in 2 weeks. Any
Sounds good.
questions?
Yep. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, last we have the Invest Hagerstown and Life Safety Infrastructure Guideline updates.
Hello.
Chris.
So following up from the work in regular session from last month, Mayor and Council had approved changes to the Invest Hagerstown, now commercial sign and facade grant, as well as the rental rehabilitation grant. I just brought forth the proposed changes to the guidelines and application to you guys, streamline the process a little bit, and come in with some of the proposed changes with those. With the sign grant itself, once again, would have a grant, $250 to $1,500 for nice professional commercial signs in our Main Street district. And the proposed changes for the rental rehabilitation program would allow for an increased grant to be provided back to a landlord developer who is doing a multi-unit upgrade of their property. Hopefully making it more amenities for our tenants and a better looking space in general. And then for the actual life safety infrastructure grant program, a nice little rebranding to actually refer to it as a fire suppression grant. One of the biggest problems is you hear life safety infrastructure, you don't know what that means. And also expanding that with our FY 2022 Community Legacy Fund application to also include sprinkler programs as well. So a developer who is going through this not only will have assistance with the vault work, but also the sprinklers for new or upgrading of property. Any kind of questions or comments?
I will make a comment. I was at the business meeting earlier today, and there was a lot of topics, a lot of discussion regarding the facade guidelines. So Brittany did state she was going to come back and do some digging to see if she can address issues. But there were several businesses that mentioned the facade guidelines.
From what I understand, after the meeting, a lot of it was not business related, it was landlord related, and I think that's something that Brittany is going to deal with. But we'll send her your way.
There's one that we have been in active conversations with, that I believe I know which one you're referring to. We have been going back multiple times trying to get that situation resolved.
Thank you. Great.
Definitely. And if there's any kind of questions or comments regarding the current guidelines for the facade grant, we try to mirror our application as well as we can with the Historic District Commission, so that instead of doing 2 applications, an individual and business only has to do 1. And we can forward it over to the HDC their way, make it a little bit more streamlined and easier for the applicant to go through the process.
Thank you. You guys, any questions?
No.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. City Administrator?
Yeah, just a couple things, Mayor. First, I want to thank everybody that attended the Main Street Business Meeting today down at 28 South. Brittany said there were about 50 participants. I think Brittany is really putting a breath of fresh air back into the program. She's really taken it on and hit the ground running, and I appreciate her and the DCED staff that's helping her out as well. I think there's going to be some great things happening with Brittany and DCED working on that, so I appreciate that. Also, I want to thank all of the staff for the past weekend's work to do what was probably the biggest financial upgrade we've had since we changed systems 15 years ago. I want to shout out the IT group, Dave Gordon, Tim McCarty, Chris Schumann, and Jim Snyder for all the work they have done, and the weekend they spent pretty much up the entire weekend making sure that the systems came back. I'm going to thank all of the Munis users in the city that went out and did the testing necessary to make this as seamless as it went. We did have some problems, nothing that was truly unexpected, nothing that wasn't recovered from. And thank for the patience of the community that's utilizing our online system to get it working correctly, and I believe it is back up. So it's just a phenomenal job done by all of them. Tomorrow night, we have a public input session down at the Triangle Island near Park Circle, where the Clara Barton Memorial is set to go. This is to get some community input on what else they would like to see down there, because there is additional room in that area to put some other stuff, and like to get the input of the public as to what they would like to see there. And lastly, Imagine Hagerstown this weekend is Friday night, and the headliner act will be Promising Leith. Actually, Promising Leith will open the show, and who is the headliner? Should have that. The Randy Thompson Band. Thank you, Wes. The Randy Thompson Band is the headliner. So it's going to be hot, but it should be a nice time down there, and hope we can get a nice crowd. That's it for me. Thanks.
Chair?
Oh, I would just echo Scott's sentiments with Brittany's efforts on the Main Street business meeting earlier. Yeah, there was a lot of people there, and a diverse crowd too. So there was a part of the meeting where the businesses would break out in groups, and they would, just brainstorm on ideas and challenges that they're facing and present it to the group as a whole. And these meetings will continue, and they're going to continue building this business community and its collaboration, so it's not so, siloed. Everyone's going to pitch in and do their part to make downtown the visions that we all want it to be.
It's exciting.
It is.
Yeah, super exciting.
Kristen?
I have nothing.
Keisha?
Yes, I just want to shout out to Colleen for the Life Jennings concert that happened on Friday night. I tell you, after leaving, people in the parking deck changing their mind about driving back to Baltimore or driving back to DC and actually, getting a hotel, and then really taking pictures of the downtown art and the buildings down there. I mean, it was just amazing to see so many people and so many people having a great time. Also, I heard a group of young women say, I cannot believe the mayor of the actual city of Hagerstown was at a Life Jennings concert. So, I mean, there was a magistrate that actually talked about being here 30 years ago, and that she was just like, I didn't want to buy the tickets. I couldn't believe that was happening here, and they actually paid at the door. And she said, wow, I'll be back. I'll be looking to see what Hagerstown is doing. This is a different Hagerstown than I remember.
Yeah, just wait.
So that was really, really good. And also, Emily's Chick Boutique, that is at 5 Public Square. I thought that was amazing that I went downtown and I bought my dress from downtown. And so both of us did.
Is that what you were in that photo?
Yes.
It was such a pretty dress.
Oh, it was amazing. I couldn't believe they had something that fit me in a
No,
boutique.
stop.
That was amazing. So Emily's Chick Boutique, I just think it's amazing. You can come down downtown and buy something, jewelry. I bought my jewelry. I bought, look at that. My dress, it's amazing. You will fall in love with it. It's so amazing. But not only does she have clothes, but she also has a ministry there where she's teaching African dance and different things. She has a makeup artist room, also a very beautiful dressing room, and it's just beautiful. And then just a reminder, everybody, Spit Your Piece is this Sunday, open mic, if there's any poets that you know. Downtown Hagerstown, 6 p.m. at the Black Box Theater. I will not be in town, but it will be hosted by Millie Mills, high school graduate, and then also Angel Hart, so a veteran in the poetry game. So that'd be exciting to see those two host that. So that's it.
Thank you. Shelley?
I just want to tell Councilman Brucci, congratulations on the birth of his latest granddaughter that was born at exactly 4 p.m. when this meeting started.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
Congratulations. And that is it for me.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
It'll put you
happy
in labor
birthday.
like a meeting
Just
like that.
nothing will put, that's right. You want to go into
And
labor.
happy birthday.
Guys, I got a request sent to me from Councilmember McIntyre for a letter of support. It's for Potomac Case Management for a youth diversion program. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
It's for the grant. It's just
For the
supporting them to apply for the grant.
Yes.
I'm
So, yeah.
Are you guys okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. I also want to thank everyone who came downtown today, and I actually, as you were speaking, someone was speaking, I got a text message from someone saying how excited they were and how incredible the meeting was. So that's pretty cool. And I also agree about Friday night in downtown Hagerstown. Man, the energy in here, that was by far the most fun I've ever had in the Maryland Theater. Like that type of music, bringing in a younger crowd, like it was so fun. The energy was incredible. Every place downtown was packed. It's like more of this. So hopefully Friday night at Imagine Hagerstown and after Imagine Hagerstown, we'll have that same vibe going on. And also today is Election Day. If you haven't voted yet, you have until 8 o'clock. Get to your polling place and vote. And lastly, happy birthday, Shelley.
Yep.
I was gonna say how old you turned,
You
but
can.
if you
I'm
wanna know.
50. Put that in the notes.
She's 50.
50.
25 times 2.
Yeah.
No, in all seriousness.
50.
I tried to wait until you went to bed last night to post about it so you didn't yell at me, but I failed.
Oh, I was
so-
awake. I was awake. I was like, what is going on?
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
With that, everyone, go vote. We're adjourned.
Welcome to Council Wrap. I'm Wes Decker, joined by Chris Simmerling, the Economic Development Manager for the City of Hagerstown. Chris, welcome back. Oh, specialist. I always want to try to get that right.
Give me the promotion. Thank you.
I think if I looked at the agenda, it says manager there. So maybe you've received. Yeah, right there.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay, that's strange.
I'm only as good as the information I receive. And that's why I let my guests do most of the talking. So I'm going to let you talk about what you discussed, brought before mayor and council, kind of a return engagement for you as it related to the Invest Hagerstown program and the three specific grant programs underneath of Invest Hagerstown. So let me ask you first, if we can just sort of get to something that is a common thread with all three of them, and that is the process. Is the process similar with each of those, and can you sort of walk us through step by step on what that process is?
Sure. So each individual program has its own application, and we try to make it as streamlined as we can. We need to have our application. We need to have support documents. We need to have things that we know exactly what the project is so we can sign off on it before anything either gets started or it's already on the way, before anything completes in the very least. And different ones have different guidelines. So for example, commercial sign and facade, we had to have a application approved and received before they can even start work or put a sign in place.
Okay.
A rental rehabilitation program, for example, the other one we talked about today, that one can actually be ongoing or planned. There's not as much I guess for lack of a better term, red tape in that regards. It's just more along the lines of if something's going to be affecting the historical viewpoint of it, we need to make sure that it is actually addressed ahead of time before someone actually makes the changes. You know, measure twice, cut once, and all that.
Okay.
And then the third program that we talked about today was the formerly known as the Life Safety Infrastructure Grant. Now it's the Fire Suppression System. Once again, it is a lot easier to actually know what the grant is about. And that one is actually funded in part by a grant that City of Hagerstown and DCD were able to obtain from the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, through their community legacy funds. So with that being a state-funded program, there is additional red tape and additional restrictions, additional guidelines that we had to make through each application follows before we can award any kind of funds that way and do any kind of drawdowns from the state.
I can't imagine red tape being involved with anything that has to do with government on any level. I mean, first of all, that just blows my mind to begin with.
Exactly. And that's part of the reason why I'm here, to help navigate through all that,
Right.
and make it as quick and simple as possible.
That's why you're the specialist.
Exactly.
And when we go back to, let me go to the third one you talked about first, because I know that that's one that is a very expensive proposition, or certainly can be for a developer, an investor, someone purchasing a property, doing some sort of work within that property. But, you know, really when it comes down to it, you really can't put a price on safety and on human lives. Now, that's one thing, certainly, but at the same time, there is that tangible price tag that goes along with it. So how much help can someone receive through that particular grant program? How much are you able to defray that cost through that particular grant?
Sure. So we have formed it out into two options, two components essentially. One is going to be the fire suppression grant.
Okay.
For the sprinkler systems, fire sprinkler systems. That is a grant ranging from $7,500 to $15,000. And then there's also the utility infrastructure component, which is from, let me just go ahead and double check my notes, just make sure I'm not, yes, $15,000 to $25,000. So that can range for a total grant back to someone in the amount of about $40,000. Now, we're talking about for projects that base minimum of $80,000 to reach that component, but we are going to be seeing those, and we have already seen those reach $200,000, $300,000, almost $400,000 in cost just to add these life-saving improvements to a property.
Wow. That is significant, without a doubt. Now, at the opposite end of the spectrum, I would guess, is the facade grant program. But at the same time, that's a business making a first impression on someone who is walking by or walking up to their particular business. So how popular a program is that, number one, and what has changed with it? What were you in front of mayor and council to present the last two times you were here as far as that particular program?
Sure. So, funnily enough, last year was the first time the facade grant has actually utilized all of its funds.
Wow, that's amazing.
The first time since it was first created in 2013.
What do
now-
you attribute that to?
Overall interest, a lot of downtown development that's going on, and just general sprucing up of the area. So the facade grant in general, it can cover replacement of windows, it can, of mixed use and commercial properties. I need to go ahead and state that. Replacement of windows, repainting the building, not new paint, but replacing the old paint.
Sure.
Sprucing up anything along the lines of essentially the face of the building, whatever makes it more appealing to the eye, more aesthetically pleasing. And that can also now include commercial signs. That is what I went in front of mayor and council for
Okay.
last month and basically formalizing with the application today. That is going to be, so you're walking down the street, you're dining down the street, you can actually see hopefully nice new signage for each business that is in our downtown, so you know what you might want to stop at, what you might want to visit on the next time through, or as you're just going down the area.
Does that create some sort of uniformity within the city at all, or what are the parameters, I guess, without getting too far outside the box here, of what that entails?
Right, so without getting too far into things, our planning and code administration, they do also have their nice little sign regulations about what a sign needs to fit for minimum criteria.
Okay.
But the biggest thing is that you're gonna be able to walk through and see nice professional looking signs versus, say, banners on the windows
All
or
right.
just free-flowing things. Some that, are professional, others that someone might have just had to do a DIY, for example. So this is gonna help defray some of the costs on those and make it more appeasing for customers and businesses to be able to get some of that traffic going.
And when we talk about the second one in there, the rental property rehabilitation grant program, what is new with that? And for me, as someone on the outside looking in, who is that for specifically?
So the changes for the rental rehab program, rental rehabilitation program, I should say, is that it is now going to be expanding it to multi-unit renovations. So for example, let's just say we have an apartment complex. Previously, even if a developer wanted to renovate 8 out of 10 units, they would be capped at a $7,500 back grant to them. Now, with this said, they can do all those renovations and it would help increase that multi-unit renovation to up to $20,000 back. Is the conditional on it being that multi-unit change, though. Now, the benefit for this is going to be for anyone who's going to be staying in that area or doing the development themselves. For a landlord or property developer in general, that's going to be helping defray some of the costs on the back end.
Okay.
They'll be reimbursed and help with the financing, things along those lines. For someone who's actually going to be moving into those places, that's going to hopefully help increase the amenities that's going to be in those places. So you're talking about your granite countertops, your air conditioning, new wood flooring, anything along those lines that makes it more livable space for you too.
Do you have any numbers that quantify the impacts of these programs?